Hello everybody, this is the Rabbit Hedgehog, and now we are on the basic of basic Suzukis besides the TU250. That's right, this is the Suzuki Boulevard S40 Cruiser. 652 single cylinder. And by golly is she, well, old. The 652 Suzuki Boulevard S40 has been around pretty much since, well, 30 years roughly. I think that'll be the actual date there. This one was actually released. But you know what? It's not an overall bad bike at all. It's one of those things where, you know, old and simple is sometimes the way to get it done. And I mean, whenever, like I said, I don't believe in the beginner bike thing. I don't believe that. You know, there's bikes that are good for beginners, but that's just the thing. These bikes can be used all the way up. I mean, if you're going to use it as a commuter, it's a great bike to use as a commuter bike. It's one of those bikes that can be used for a long time to come, because this one still has a pretty decent amount of power. It is a single cylinder thumper. It doesn't really have that good of engine braking, to be honest. But it does have the, let's see, drum brake in the rear, disc brake in front, 652cc single cylinder engine. So it gets you a little bit more power than most of your other bikes, like the smaller Honda Rebel or even the TU250X I rode a little bit earlier. But it's still not going to be the most amazingly fast vehicle ever. Now, surprisingly, I'm riding two up. I do have my wife on board. And, you know, to be honest, it's not that bad. This is kind of the bike that we're looking for. This is the one that we're thinking that we could get for, because it's light, it weighs 380 pounds, I do know that for a fact, and that's fully wet. And it's got a really low seat height, roughly 27 inches or so. It's a very narrow bike, and with the narrow type bike that it is, it makes it really easy to control. It makes it really easy to put your feet on the ground and ride it. You know, especially when you're a newer rider and you need that confidence and things like that. But it's also a good bike to just ride around the city if you have to constantly hold it up. It's not going to, you know, weigh too much for you, and it's not going to hurt you or bother you or anything like that. So, I mean, overall, as one of those bikes that's just kind of a smaller but older design and really goes back to the honesty of the original motorcycles, this is one of those bikes that, you know, like I said, it's not terrible. It doesn't vibrate as bad as you would think a thumper does. It actually does pretty good. It does vibe. But not, like I said, not terribly. The chassis is fairly compliant. I mean, I'm not complaining about anything on the turning ability. It doesn't feel wonky or anything like that. Despite it being an older design, you know, Suzuki's definitely got their act together with this bike. So it's one of those bikes that's not too bad at all. That drum brake doesn't make a difference. We still stop pretty decently. Everything's pretty good. Well, what do you think of this? Yeah, it's not as vibe happy as you would think it would be, is it? Real easy to turn bike. I mean, it's just so narrow. Just so narrow. I mean, it's just, like I said, it's one of those bikes that gives you confidence. I mean, I like it, to be honest. I mean, it's one of those bikes I don't really have any complaint about. I mean, it's not doing anything in particularly great. It's not necessarily the most powerful bike. It's very simplistic. I hate the speedometer position. I always hate those speedometers on the tank. That's always one thing about me when it comes to bikes. I like the speedometers being out there, like my Triumph or the Sportster or the Scout, or, you know, where it's just readable and right there and in your face. And this one you got to look down quite a bit to see, oh, I'm doing 45. Now, because it is that simple of a bike, it is still carbureted. It is, you know, it doesn't have any fuel gauges or fuel lights or anything like that. So you do have a small reserve tank. It only has about a 2.8 gallon tank, so it's not a very big tank at all. But it gets somewhere around 70 miles per gallon. Once again, these smaller 250 engines generally get very good gas mileage. Yeah, engine braking like barely exists on this thing. Just not a big engine really to push back at you, though. One thing I'm actually happy about these bikes, and it's just one of those things, has a belt drive. I like bikes with belt drive because every time it's a condition like this where it's raining, you don't have to worry about lubing the chain every time it rains. And I keep that to heart because I've seen people rust their chains out in no time for no reason when they could have just simply lubed it after a rain or riding through the mud. I mean, like I said, it is not the quickest thing in the world, but I mean, it gets up to speed, and it doesn't seem to mind having a 2-up position, and I'm a very big boy. I know how much I weigh. I joked about with my wife, I think to us together, almost weigh more than this whole bike does by itself. So, you know, it's one of those things where it's not terrible, but it's just, you know, it's a comfortable bike. I actually enjoy the seating. It's very, very cruiser-like. It's more set up like, you know, because mostly it's such a small bike that the forward positioning, it actually feels more like my Harley 1200T with a 3-inch forward from mid, even though it's fully forward on this bike. That's where it's kind of funny. It's just because it's so small. And like I said, so narrow, it turns real well. It's very confidence-inspiring, even if you do got a 2-up position, and you're just kind of rolling around town. So let's see what happens when I get up to the interstate, because we're getting up there pretty quick. And let's see how it handles on the interstate, because this might be a bike that, hey, even though it is a 652 single cylinder and a very basic bike, 28-year-old design, as the guy said, or 30-year-old design, somewhere in there, then, you know, it might still be good to go. It might still actually be able to hold its own on the interstate, even if it is a little bit less powerful. That time the engine braking kicked in fairly decently. I mean, it doesn't accelerate like any of those bikes up there, but I've got the bike up in front of me is the bike I just test rode, was that M109R, and that thing is wicked. I love that thing. That's a fast bike in itself. Very good torque, very smooth. I mean, everything's good on that bike. I loved it. Of course, that's a Gixxer, I think 750 right there. I want to say the guy in front of all of us, no, never mind, that's the other guy. He's way up there, I guess. He'd be on the GSXR 1000. I'm just trying to remember the course this time. I mean, like I said, overall, I don't have any qualms with this bike. I mean, my keister's fine. I don't feel beat up. I mean, the suspension's even softer than my Sportster, and even with all the weight on it, it's doing very well. I didn't get a chance to preload it or anything like that, so I guess it's in its basic riding position. And to be honest, even though it's not preloaded, it actually doesn't complain. It's not really having a bad time with the weight. Like I said, drum braking, I mean, even though it's an older drum, it is still adequate braking. So I don't have any qualms with it. Oh, that's going to be rocks. This is from earlier. I'm seeing them come off that Gixxer right there. And that kind of doesn't feel too good. Thought it was hail earlier because we've been having some thunderstorms in the area, and I thought that was the tail end of that storm producing some of that. All right. I mean, this bike's doing 55 right now, and it's not complaining. I mean, that's one of the things that I like about it. It's not really complaining. It's not a Honda Rebel, where it's a tiny bike like this, but a 250 parallel, and doesn't really have as much power as it should. It's not the, you know, V-Stars, the little 250 they got there, because we've been trying everything for my wife, trying to figure something out that she'd like. But this is the little bike that can. I mean, that's what I gotta say about it. I mean, going through the turns on it, not bad at all. It does well. Can actually accelerate through the turn. There's our group waiting for us. definitely tell it's a drum brake when you put it on, that's for sure. Kind of got that weird burr feeling, unlike a disc brake, which is smooth. Very vibe happy in the upper end of it because I decided to give her a little bit of a twist there. That guy said, "Don't pass me." And I'm like, well, that'd be an embarrassment. Well, I probably can. I think I'm a better rider. Ouch. Those rocks hurt. So overall, if you're looking for a bike that you just want to get around to the city with, and maybe even some mid to long or mid-range trips, not necessarily long-term trips. I mean, this doesn't have the gas tank for a long-term, but at least the mid-range. I know that you can buy a windshield for this bike and some other accessories for it, and a small little thing of saddlebags and stuff like that. And that way, you can take it at least a little bit of ways. It should have a comparable range of a Sportster, despite having a little bit of a disadvantage in the tank size, unless you got the old 48s and the 72s with the 2 peanut tank, or 2.8 peanut tank, whatever that little thing is. Never liked that. Always went with 3.3 iron or 4.5 walnut from the customs and things like that. Got some gravel here, better be careful. They let us go for it. Alright, here we go to the interstate. Let's see how she does here. You notice acceleration isn't terrible to get to the interstate at all. Of course, I'll be everybody will leave me behind now. But, I mean, it gets up to speed. It's doing fine. Got to catch up with the group here. It says I'm doing 80. I mean, it's still got a little bit more to go. So, I mean, it's not a terrible bike. It'll get there. Yeah, it'll hold highway speed just fine. I mean, a lot of people worry about that with these smaller bikes, but this one's doing fine. So, when it comes down to the bikes that you're talking about, when you're looking at smaller commuter bikes, if you want a bike that can actually hold the interstate speeds that you need to, this bike will do it. This bike will do it just fine. Right now, I'm actually holding fairly steady at 80 miles an hour. I don't really want to, but everybody else is kind of walking away from me. I'm trying to catch up to the tail end of the group. But I mean, it does it. I mean, it's not having a problem doing it at all. And it actually still feels like it wants to give me a little bit more. So, if you guys worry about that, then this is a bike that you can really go with. I mean, this is a bike that you can stick around with for a long time. I mean, even though it is a little bit older in design, it's carbureted and things like that, this bike will actually still hold its own and be able to hold those highway speeds that you need to go. So, like I said, this one will become a better mid-range cruiser versus the TU250, where it's only a city kind of ride. This one will do both for you. This one will get you out on the interstate and get you a little bit further. So, like I said, right now, I mean, the chassis is really compliant. I don't have any complaints with this at all. My wife's on the back, doesn't have any problems at all, I don't think. She's not signaling anything. And I mean, and it's amazing that I'm still able to hold this kind of speed despite that fact that it's got that extra weight with such a small engine. So it's definitely got enough for you if you want to look at that in perspective. So once again, this is the Rabid Hedgehog. This is going to be a good bike for you if you just want to cruise around town, maybe go on a mid-range cruise. Definitely confidence inspiring if you don't like the weight of other bikes and things like that, and can be outfitted with enough that can get you where you need to go. Have a good one, folks. We'll catch you on the flip side or the next ride.